my dears, and welcome back to my corner of the internet. I'm Shannon, and today I've got another book talk video to share with you guys. And today we are talking about Magic Hour by Kristin Hannah. This is the second book by Kristin Hannah that I've read. I also read her book The Nightingale, and I absolutely loved that one. There's a book talk video on that one. I will try to find it and link it down below if you're interested. So I went into this book and I was pumped. I was ready. I also have a third book by her that I can't remember the name of, but it's sitting at the top of my to be read pile, and I'm hopefully going to tackle that in November or December. So yeah, after I read The Nightingale, I picked up these other two books, and I was really excited to read more from her. So let's talk a little bit about what Magic Hour is about. The book starts off and we meet Julia. We meet her in this kind of weird way where she's just about to be pardoned from a legal case. We learn that she's one of the country's top-ranked child psychiatrists, and we learned that there was something that went wrong with one of the clients that was in her care. You kind of start to piece together that one of her clients kind of snapped and killed two of their peers. And so she was brought into the court proceedings to see if she was to be held responsible at all because she was a psychiatrist and she didn't pick up on the fact that this child was getting ready to snap. But right at the beginning, we learn that she's pardoned from that, that the parents, they don't hold her responsible because how could she know? Obviously, someone knew that something was off with this child because she was in therapy to begin with, but the parents don't blame her and the courts agree. But even though her name is cleared, she's kind of, it was a big media circus around this trial, and even though she was cleared in the public eye, she's still connected to it. So she goes back to work, but a lot of her clients have canceled their appointments. So she decides that she's going to shut it all down for a while, take a much needed break. Then we switch perspectives to her sister. She has a sister named Ellie, who is the police chief in the small town in Washington State where they grew up. Ellie is pretty much the opposite of Julia personality-wise. She's very outgoing. She's been married 2 or 3 times. She's really, the men love her. She's outgoing and flirty, whereas Julia's a bit more reserved, quiet. So when we meet Ellie, she's at the police station sort of bantering around with 2 friends that she grew up, who one's a police officer and one just works in the office. His name is Cal. And they get a call that there's a child in town and she's up in a tree. She has a wolf pup with her. She's not talking to anyone. She won't come out of the tree. So Ellie goes down to see what's going on, and she finds exactly what she was told she would find: a child who looks to be about 5 or 6 years old up in a tree. She's dirty. They can tell that this child has not eaten in a long time, been cleaned in a long time. She looks like she's been through it, and she won't come down out of the tree, and she has a wolf pup with her. So after a bit of time, they manage to get her down. She's non-communicative. She's very feral. She's howling and growling and groaning, and she's got her pup, her wolf pup, and they're having a hard time getting her calmed down. So what they do eventually is they manage to get her down from the tree by offering food. So Ellie gets everyone in the town out of the way. Get out of here. Let me try to get this child down. Eventually she does by, like I said, putting out food. The child cannot resist it. Child comes down. She's eating like an animal, with her hands just crazy wild, like someone who hasn't eaten in a very long time and maybe hasn't been taught any manners. So eventually, somebody comes, sort of sneaks upon the girl, gives her a tranquilizer, a sedative to sort of knock her out, so they can transport her to the hospital and see what's going on. Once they get a better look at her, and the doctor there, his name is Max, they kind of think that if she can speak, she still isn't. She's just communicating in grunts and groans and growls. And Ellie decides that she's going to call her sister, Julia, and see if Julia will come there and help her with the child. So she calls Julia, and Julia thinks at first that this is just a ruse for her sister to get her to come home. And she's kind of like, Ellie, listen, I'm fine. You don't have to make up stories for me to come there. Like, I'm fine. And Ellie's like, no, it's true. This child, she needs your help. So Julia eventually says, okay, even though she's still a little skeptical that this child even exists. So she gets there, and Ellie takes her to see the child. And at first, Julia thinks that maybe the child is autistic. But after a while, the girl starts making direct eye contact and just other behaviors that Ellie thinks, that Julia thinks, no, I don't think the child's autistic. I think the child's wild. I think the child's been living in the woods for a very, very long time and doesn't really know how to behave in social situations. Maybe doesn't even know how to speak and things like that. So in between these chapters, when all this is happening, we get glimpses into the little girl's perspective, and we get to hear things she's thinking about, and she's very scared. She's very, very scared. In her thoughts, she refers to herself as girl, and she talks about a hymn that she knew from the woods. She had been living in the woods before she had made her way to town. And she talks about a her who died, and then a him who she's very afraid of. And the doctors, Max, who examined her at the hospital when she was brought in, there were on her body, there were bruises and just scrapes and cuts, and around her ankle there were ligature marks where he could tell that she had been tied up, probably for a very long period of time. So while Julia's trying to help the child and work with the Dr. Max, they put out a search for this girl's parents. They're thinking, maybe she got lost and was in the woods, or, somehow she got separated from her parents. And then from there, a lot of what transpires is just Julia working with the girl, trying to get her to come out of her shell a bit, trying to get her to speak, most of all, because she thinks, if I can get this child to speak, I can get her to give us some information about who she is and where she's from. And she starts calling her Alice at some point, because whenever Julia reads Alice in Wonderland to her, she gets a big reaction. She loves it. And as time goes by, Julia notices that so what she does is she takes the child into her home, her sister's home, as a foster child, because she feels like, working with her for a few hours a day at the hospital, that's not enough. I need to have her in my home so I can be working with her 24 hours a day. And so that's what she does. And then Julia notices that as she's going about her daily routine, the little girl's sort of mimicking her. So when she gets up in the morning, she goes to the bathroom. And when they had first found the child, they put her in diapers, even though she was 6 years old, because she wouldn't use the washroom. But as she's watching Julia go into the bathroom, use the washroom, she starts to do it too. So Julia thinks that's a really good sign that, maybe that she's learning so quickly. So tons and tons of people from all around the country who had children who were missing or kidnapped or abducted, I guess those two are the same kind of, but they start flooding in with pictures of their children, even if their children aren't the right age, just in case, but they're not having any luck finding this girl's parents after seeing many, 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 many families. So it's a really interesting story. Kristin Hannah, she has, I think, really good character development in this book. In the other book I read by her, The Nightingale, I really loved it. The Nightingale, out of these two, The Nightingale is still my favorite. But this one, it's good. The writing at times gets a little, I don't love it. Some of the dialogue is really cheesy. At one point, Julia gets into a bit of a relationship with the doctor, Max, and their exchanges are really cringy. Really cringy. Like bad romance novel cringy. But mostly what that tells me is Kristin Hannah wasn't made to write romance. She was made to write different kind of fiction. So whenever she ventures into the romance between the characters, it just comes off as all wrong to me. But when she's writing not romantic scenes, she's a great writer, and I enjoyed this quite a bit. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to give some spoilers for anyone who wants them. So if you're not interested in spoilers, now is probably the best time to click away. Thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed it. And if you read it, I would love to hear what you thought of it. So now, let's get into the spoilers for all the rest of you who are left. So as time goes on, like I said, the bulk of the middle of the book is just Julia working with the girl who she's calling Alice to help her to get to speak, and she starts to get really desperate, and she starts to, she's got social services kind of circling around her saying, you can't foster this child forever. She needs to be in an institution. And Julia's thinking, like, if I could just get this kid to talk, maybe they'd give me some more time. As luck would have it, and as time goes by, the little girl does begin to speak a little bits and pieces, but she's speaking at about the level of a toddler. So Julia's starting to think that she's probably been in the wild for 3 to 4 to 5 years since she was pretty young. After a bit of that, a man shows up at Ellie's work at the police station, and he claims to be Alice's father, and only he calls her Brittany. And so that chapter kind of ends there with I'm her father. And then the next chapter has Ellie going to Julia and telling her. And the bit of the twist here, which makes sense in the end, is she says the man who says he's Julia's father is a man named George. I think it's like Alvarez. And Julia says, George Alvarez, wasn't he put in prison for killing his wife and daughter? And they're like, she's like, yeah. And they learn that he had been let out because there just wasn't enough evidence to keep him in there. And he'd been in there for 3 or 4 years, so like the right amount of time for how long Alice, or Brittany, but we're going to keep calling her Alice was in the woods. So right before George had arrived, Julia had begun adoption proceedings because she wanted to adopt Julia. She wanted Alice. She wanted Alice to have the stability of a home and a mom and knowing just that security, that safety. So George comes, and yeah, both sisters are kind of like, no way is this man who is in prison for murder is coming and taking this child. And so Julia tries to explain to him that, she has 2 special needs. You don't know how to deal with this child. And what the hell happened with your wife and kid? Like, what happened? And so what George explains to her is he was at work or out, wherever he was. He was not at home on this day. And when he came home, his wife and child were missing. And he maintained throughout the whole investigation that he hadn't been home, that somebody must have come and taken them. Which of course sounds really far-fetched, but he was cleared of it because there wasn't enough evidence. And so Julia knows that Alice does not recognize this man. So like whoever was holding her captive in the woods, Alice doesn't know. It wasn't George because Alice doesn't recognize him. So that's one good thing. Whenever Julia tries to tell him like, oh, you can't care for her, you don't have the ability that I have, he's like, but she's my daughter. She was taken when she was 2 years old. I'll get the best doctors. And so when you're reading it, you feel for Julia, and you know that Julia would love her and care for her, But at the same time, you feel a bit for this man who's like, she's my daughter, I'll get her the best care. So Julia decides that the best thing to do would be to try to get Alice to lead them into the woods and show them where she had been held captive and see if they can kind of piece together what happened. So they take her in so far. They don't want to take her to the site because they think that would be way too traumatic. So they just take her in a little ways and have her point the way. Julia stays with Alice, and then George and Ellie go further into the woods. And they find the camp. They find the leashes kind of that were used to tie Alice. And they find another one with a sort of bigger loop that they realize was used to tie Alice's mother. And then we realized too that when Alice was talking about a her who died, that had been her mother who died. And then whatever happened to the man who had been holding her, whatever had led to him leaving, the man whose prints who are all over the campsite where Alice had been held was hit and killed by a car on the highway nearby. So I don't know if he had been looking for Alice or if he had left first or what happened, and it's from there that Alice manages to get away and finds her way into that town where Ellie had found her. So how the book ends is George eventually, the courts, of course, give George custody because he's her father. Of course, the courts are always in favor of trying to reunite families whenever possible. And George had really good plans for getting Alice the best treatment that he could. So Julia tries to tell Alice what's happening. She says, you're going to go with him. He's your dad. But these words don't mean anything to Alice, like he's your dad. Like that doesn't mean anything to her because she's not at that point where she can identify relationships and know what they mean and things like that. And he takes her, and then we're left with a very, very heartbroken Julie and Ellie and the Dr. Max and the two other police officers, or the police officer and the guy that works in the police station, Cal. They're all just heartbroken that she's gone. But there is a happy ending, kind of. What happens is after a while, George brings her back to Julie. She says, or Julia. Have I been saying Julie all this time? It's Julia. The little girl calls her Julie too. But technically her name's Julia. He brings her back because he realizes pretty quickly that it's more than he thought it was. Like, her trauma and her troubles are deeper and bigger than he realized. And she's just constantly howling and crying and calling for Julia. And so he brings her back, and he is heartbroken. And one of the things that I kind of forgot to mention is when they're up at the scene, him and Ellie, when they're at the campsite where Alice had been held hostage, and he puts it together. He realizes that, that's where his wife was held and where she died. And that was where his child was held from 2 years old on. He breaks down. He's crying. He's so visibly upset. And Ellie's watching him, and she's trying to maintain her professionalism because she's not there as a pal. She's there as the chief of police, and she's having a hard time. And it's during that period that she sees and understands that, maybe he is as innocent as he claims he is. And they can see now that this was a thing he had nothing to do with. And she can see his pain and his suffering and his loss. And so when he brings Alice back, Julia says to him, she says, she will know when she's older and can understand. She will know what you did for her, that you sacrificed your own happiness or your own, want of having your child with you for her good. And she will know, I will make sure she knows how much you loved her and that you did this for her. And it ends beautifully, and it's heart-wrenching, and it was kind of in the place where, there's not going to be a happy ending for everyone. There just couldn't be. But I think that was the best ending that it could have. If George had taken her and kept her, Julia would have spent the rest of her life just constantly every day wondering about that child and if she was getting the best care that she possibly could. So I think it was for the best. And hopefully down the road, you know, maybe he'll get to visit her once she's old enough to understand. Who knows? Who knows what'll happen? But yes, that is Magic Hour by Kristin Hannah. Like I said, it was good. The parts that weren't cringy romance scenes are good. And I can appreciate a good romance scene. It's not like I'm anti, you know, love stories, but Kristin Hannah, she shines when she's down to business writing the story and getting that plot out. She's a great weaver of plots, I think. But man alive, when she writes those love scenes, they're cringy. But I quite enjoy her. And again, too, if you haven't read The Nightingale as well by her, it's top notch. And I can't wait to jump into the third book here that I have. It's over on my bookshelf. I keep squinting at it to see if I can pick out the title from here, but I can't. Hey, Shannon from the future here. It's actually called The Great Alone. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you have a fantastic weekend, and I will see you guys on Monday. Bye.